I kept a log long before the Institute ever asked me to. Back on Earth, I spent 11 years investigating workplace incidents for a mid-sized fabrication company. Not glamorous work. A guy slips on a wet floor, a guard gets bypassed on a press, someone loses 2 fingers on a Tuesday that looked exactly like every other Tuesday. My job was never to decide who was right in the room. It was to write down what happened, when, and who saw it, until the pattern was undeniable to a stranger reading the file cold. 1 incident is bad luck. 6 incidents, same trigger, same hour, are a system failing on a schedule. I carried that habit across 40 light years without meaning to. It just came with me, the way a limp comes with an old brake. The Corvessa Institute of Applied Conduct ran its discipline code the same way, whether it knew it or not. A single complaint against another cadet got you a conversation and a note in a drawer. A documented pattern, dated, timed, witnessed, got you a hearing. Nobody had ever explained why the threshold was set that high. I didn't need it explained. I recognized the shape of an institution protecting itself from he said, she said, and I understood exactly how to work inside it. The refectory annex where most of it happened was a long hall under high windows, the kind of light that made every species in the room look a little washed out and a little more honest than they meant to. 6 species ate at those tables on a rotating mess schedule, which meant the room ran on 100 small unspoken rules about who sat where and in what order the line moved, none of them written down, all of them enforced by cadets. Because no proctor wanted the job of policing a seating chart, I'd learned within a week that half the tension in that hall came from nobody being willing to say the rules out loud. That suited me. I've never needed anyone to say a rule out loud before I could recognize when it was being broken. Dressavain started on me the 2nd week, in the refectory annex, over nothing. A data slate I'd set down a half a meter from where she wanted to sit. Karseth cadets carry a throat pouch that flushes color when they're asserting rank, a status display they can't fully suppress even when they try. Hers went a hard amber the first time. I didn't flinch, didn't apologize, didn't move my slate an inch faster than I would have moved it anyway. I logged it. Time, date, the exact words. The 3 cadets who saw it from the next table. Entry 1. She came back the next day, and the day after that. Always some small territorial correction I was supposedly failing to make. A chair, a cue position, a serving order. Each time her pouch flushed brighter when I didn't give her the reaction the display was built to extract. I understood, even then, that I wasn't the target of malice exactly. I was the malfunction in a signal she'd never had to send twice. Something in her biology expected the amber to work. It kept not working, and each failure seemed to demand a louder attempt. I logged every one. 9 entries by the end of the 1st month. My roommate, a broad, easygoing transfer named Osei who'd have decked her by entry 3, kept asking why I didn't just report it and be done. I told him a single report was a coin flip between 2 accounts of the same afternoon. A record was a wall. He didn't love the answer, but he stopped pushing, and he started quietly making sure he was near me at meals, which I noted and didn't log, because some things aren't evidence, they're just decency. By entry 20, other cadets had started keeping half an eye on the pattern too, the way you watch weather building over a ridge without being able to say exactly when it breaks. Dress's escalations were still just short of anything the Institute's threshold would call physical, a shoulder that clipped mine a little too hard passing a doorway, a tray set down close enough to my hand that the edge caught my knuckle. I logged the knuckle. I logged the doorway. I did not raise my voice at either, because raising my voice would have been exactly the signal her pouch was fishing for, and I had 11 years of practice not giving people what they were fishing for. By entry 30, I'd stopped thinking of it as patience, and started thinking of it as method. The Institute's proctors moved through the refectory annex on a loose rotation and rarely caught the small stuff, which was the point of the small stuff. It lived exactly in the gap between what a system notices and what a person endures. I wasn't waiting to be brave. I was waiting for the file to be complete enough that bravery wouldn't be the variable that decided anything. Somewhere around entry 25, a 2nd-year Karseth cadet named Torvik started sitting a few seats down most mornings, not saying much, just watching Dress's pouch the way I was watching it, except he flinched every time it flared and I didn't. He told me once, quietly, that he'd transferred out of a cohort back home rather than keep competing against a cadet whose display never lost. I told him I wasn't competing against anything. I was recording it. He looked at me like that was a stranger thing to say than anything Dressa had done all month. And maybe it was, but it was also the only thing I knew how to do that wouldn't make the pattern worse before it was finished proving itself. Entry 40 came on a Thursday, 3 weeks before what I'd eventually think of as the end of it, though at the time it felt like just another Thursday. Dressa's pouch had gone from amber to a deep sustained copper I hadn't logged before. a color none of the other Karseth cadets showed even at their loudest. I noted the color change specifically, because a pattern that changes shape right before it breaks is the most important entry in any file, and because 11 years had taught me that the last data point before an incident is always the one people wish they'd written down sooner. It broke on a Tuesday, in the refectory annex, at the long tables under the high windows, in front of maybe 60 cadets and no proctor at all. I don't remember deciding to turn. I remember the tray leaving her hands correctly, on purpose, aimed at my collarbone, and I remember my body doing something 11 years of watching people go down on factory floors had apparently taught it without asking my permission. A half turn, a redirect off the forearm instead of the chest, her own momentum carrying her past me into the table edge before she'd finished the motion. It was over in less time than it takes to say it happened. 4 seconds, maybe less. Nobody was hurt beyond a bruised hip and a dented tray. I didn't press an advantage that wasn't there to press. I stepped back, put my hands where everyone could see them were empty, and waited. The room did the thing rooms do after something snaps and nobody's sure yet whether it's over. 60 cadets very quiet, very still, deciding in real time what they'd just watched. Osei was on his feet without a sound, not moving toward Dressa, just standing where he'd be visible if anyone needed a second witness who wasn't me. Conduct Officer Farrant arrived 40 seconds later, which in a room that size is fast. She asked what happened, the standard opening, the one built to sort blame between two accounts that never fully agree. I didn't give her an account. I set my data slate on the table, 41 entries deep, time-stamped, witnessed, sorted by escalation, ending with a tray thrown in front of 60 people at 12:14 hours on a Tuesday. I told her the tray was entry 41 and let the first 40 speak for themselves. She read for longer than I expected a proctor to read anything in a mess hall. When she looked up, she wasn't looking at me the way people look at someone who just won an argument. She was looking at me the way you look at a fire log after the fire's already out, checking whether the timeline holds. It held. She said she'd need the slate for the hearing record, and I handed it over, and that was the whole exchange. No raised voice, no verdict read aloud. Dressa was walked out by a second proctor, throat pouch gone, the flat gray I'd never once seen on her, and I never learned what became of her file, because that part of the system wasn't built to share its endings with the person who'd fed it evidence. What changed wasn't dramatic. Osei sat a little closer at meals for a week, then went back to sitting exactly where he always had, which told me more than a speech would have. Cadets who'd spent a month watching the weather build over that ridge started nodding at me in the corridor instead of glancing away, small and wordless. The kind of acknowledgement that doesn't require anyone to admit they'd been afraid to say anything sooner. Nobody threw me a ceremony. Nobody should have. I hadn't done anything except keep writing things down until the writing did the part I couldn't do alone. I still keep the log. Different cadet, different reason. Most weeks nothing worth an entry at all. But I've learned that on a Tuesday that looks exactly like every other Tuesday, the only thing standing between a pattern and a coincidence is somebody bothering to date it.